Welcome to the Career Coffee Chat Show, my friends. Now, let's be honest. Does your inner critic get too bossy? Do you want to better understand how to unleash your inner brilliance? Well, if this sounds like you, then you're in the right place because this is exactly what we'll be talking about today, my friends. My outstanding guest, Sheryl Anjanette, and I will share how you can remove those pesky roadblocks that hold you back from achieving your fullest potential. So now, if you've never seen my smiling face before, and this is your first time watching Career Coffee Chat live or listening to the podcast, my name is Erin Urban or Coach E Urban. You can find more about me at coacheurban.com. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can find that at Coach E Urban as well. And be the first to know about new shows and events. And also, Career Coffee Chat podcast can be found on your favorite app, no matter what that is. We're all over the place and all over the world. Now, as you tune in, my friends, whether you're listening live or watching live or listening to the replay, don't be shy. Say hi. I want to welcome you to the show. So please don't be shy. Say your name, say where you're from. And if you are watching the replay later on, hey, we're here for you. Don't be shy. Pop your comments in, and we'll see those, or send us a message as well. Now, I'd love to share a little bit more about our guest on today's show. But before I do that, I have another thing I'd like to give you today, my friends, before we get started. I bet a lot of you are high achievers or driven individuals, or maybe you're not quite sure why you're not using your voice enough. Chances are, if that's what's going on, you could be experiencing what is known as imposter syndrome. Now, what's interesting about imposter syndrome is it is widely misunderstood. Now, our special guest, Sheryl Anjanette, is an author and advanced NLP practitioner, cognitive behavioral neuroscience, clinical stress, anxiety, and emotional regulation, to name a few. She's backed by a 30 plus high powered career as an entrepreneur and executive in marketing and communications. And Sheryl has dedicated her business to helping individuals and organizations overcome the debilitating effects of imposter syndrome and more. So, without further ado, let's give Sheryl a warm welcome. Sheryl, great to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Erin. It's so good to be here.
Yes, I'm thrilled to have this conversation. We were chatting a little bit backstage before we started the show, and I've been looking forward to actually talking to you for over a month now because we've talked about imposter syndrome here and there, and like some of the sabotaging mindsets and this and that on the show. But I feel like imposter syndrome is very misunderstood. But before we get into that, I'm fascinated to understand you've had this high-powered executive background. What drew you to this particular type of work?
Oh my goodness, that's such a good question. I'm not sure I would have ever envisioned myself where I am today, other than the fact that I've had this 30-year plus career, as you mentioned, as an entrepreneur and also a senior executive. But the one thread that continued throughout that career was my interest in organizational and in individual health. So I've
Hmm.
always been really passionate. In fact, my first entrepreneurial venture was a company called Performance Alliance. And it was
Okay.
really about my passion for organizational health. So health and wellness has always been a part of kind of my makeup.
Wow.
And I'm talking not just about physical health, but about emotional health, mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very interested in psychology, even though I'm not a psychologist, interested, kind of a neuroscience geek. And so at a certain point in my career, I thought, what am I really passionate about? I'm finally at a place now where I don't have to do something because I have to. I get to choose what I want to do. Right? Yes, I know it's such a great feeling. And I know that's the work you do. So it's really aligned. And I thought it's around health and wellness. And so that's where I started Anjanette Wellness. And as I was working with people and I was showing up in these groups and I was really trying to help people get to this place that, where they want to be, to manifest the things they really want, I noticed that there were a lot of gaps, like
Mm-hmm.
almost like the cracks in the foundation. And
Mm-hmm.
at the time, I was on this audio app, Clubhouse, and I started a room and I started to ask people, and I kept hearing this imposter syndrome. So I
Hmm.
thought, okay, what is imposter syndrome? Why is everybody talking about this?
Right. Yeah.
And I noticed these were the gaps. These were the gaps in why people were getting blocks and fears and limiting beliefs, things that were holding them back, why their behaviors were really showing up as procrastination and people pleasing,
Mm.
perfectionism and overthinking. And I thought, well, this is like this umbrella topic. And I looked at people out there that were doing things on this topic, and I thought there's some really good work, but I had a different approach, a different view. I really feel, and I've shown that you can get past imposter syndrome.
Right. It's not pervasive. It's not systemic. You don't have to live with it. It's something that can be, if not cured, it can be removed from the psyche, if you will. It's not something
Yes.
you have to deal with. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because certainly before we started the show, a lot of people do have this misconception that some of these things that we feel or we experience in our life are just like become part of our ego. Like, oh well, I had this thing, and we start to identify with it, which makes it more difficult to get rid of, my friends, when you start to really identify with these things. So what I'm interested though, Cheryl, is you are an author. You wrote a book, The
Yes.
Imposter Lies Within. I think you have a book there. You want to show everybody
Oh,
a book?
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. The
The
imposter
book.
lies within. Here's the
Yeah.
book.
So
There
in
it
this
is.
book, you propose that there's several different types of imposter syndromes.
Yeah.
It's not just this blanket thing. It actually shows up in different ways, and I'd be really curious to understand what that is. And it sounds like it's a little bit more pervasive than we maybe first understood.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I talk about, I put together sort of a framework of 7 archetypes.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of us that have worked on imposter syndrome try to give people a framework. For example, Dr. Um, um, Valerie Young, who wrote The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, she talks about 5 competency types. And
Right.
yeah, and I was actually inspired by a couple of her competency types as well. But I think this idea of having a framework, a way to really understand how this is showing up. It's almost like, if I dare say, a diagnosis, even though it's not an actual diagnosis, it's a way for us to understand.
Right.
Because otherwise, what we're dealing with are these symptoms.
Mm.
And I worked in healthcare, and I don't know if you knew this, but I worked in healthcare, and we worked with patients who had debilitating illness, the immune
Mm.
based illnesses that were often undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. And
Right.
it was once they had a proper diagnosis, once they were actually able to understand what it was, that they were able to do something about that. So that really inspired me to
Mhm.
create somewhat of a framework so people could start to understand it. But I will say, with that word understanding, I have noticed that a lot of people don't really understand
Well, let's
even what
talk about
imposter
that.
syndrome
Yeah,
really
I'd love to
is.
talk about that, because for anybody tuning in now or later, if you feel like, well, I'm experiencing this thing and I'm not really sure if it's imposter syndrome or if it's not, feel free to pop it if you feel comfortable. Pop it in the comments. Like this show is for you, my friends, for those of you tuning either live or watching the replay or listening to the podcast. This is for you. So if you feel comfortable, pop it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And I would love to learn more about, like, so what is it really?
Yeah. So I find the best way to understand this is that it's a psychological pattern where someone feels like they're not good enough in spite of evidence to the contrary, in spite of their
Mm,
accomplishment. So if you think about this idea of a pattern, a psychological pattern, it is
mhm,
patterned, right? We
mhm,
get this patterning and this programming. And feeling of not good enough is really core to this. There are some other feelings like I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, not deserving, my voice doesn't matter, I don't matter. And it's in spite of. So, in spite of is the disconnect. There's a disconnect or cognitive dissonance
mhm.
between reality and our own internal perception,
Right.
right? So, a lot of people, I've heard this, I've heard all these myths. People will say things like, you don't have imposter syndrome because you're not really an imposter. So if you can see that you're not really an imposter, you'll see that you don't. And by the way, I don't like to use the word have because I don't think we should own it. I
Right.
prefer to use the word experience, but you're
Mhm.
not experiencing imposter syndrome. And the truth is that imposter syndrome doesn't mean you're an imposter, and it doesn't mean other people think you're an imposter. It's that we
Mm.
feel like we're the imposter. It's
It's a
internalized.
disconnect.
Yeah, it's a disconnect. And we feel like we're just putting on a mask and we're showing people really who we're not. And eventually they're gonna take off the mask and they're gonna say, aha, you've been fooling us.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I've never felt like I was imposter or I was having to play a game that I'm not like showing up 100% as. But you did say something a minute ago that really struck a nerve because I have this. Let's say yeah, a lot of things come from childhood, right? What we see or what we
Yes.
hear then creates these systemic mindsets. Well, something that you mentioned, my voice or what I have to say, I think is
My voice
doesn't
doesn't matter.
matter. My voice
Yeah.
doesn't matter, right?
Or I
And
don't matter.
right. Now I've had to fight that. And part of it's because of, early childhood experience, my mom and my dad separating when I was young. And then even though logically, even as a young child, I understood like, oh, okay, yeah, it's not that my dad doesn't love me. But the limbic brain doesn't care about logic. It's all emotion driven.
It's all emotional when we're little. We're like squishy little emotional beings.
We
We're not
are.
thinking about this. There's not any logic or reason, which is why it gets so suppressed because we don't have words for it,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
our logic brain says, well, that doesn't make sense. So it pushes it to the side. But the limbic brain is going, yeah, it doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense because this is how I feel.
yeah, and those it's not so much our beliefs, but it's like the experience and our interpretation of that experience that
Mhm.
creates that belief. So I feel this, and I start to believe that I'm not good enough, and I look for evidence because our brain is wired to look for evidence to make us right.
Prove us right.
Look
Yeah,
for
right.
evidence to make
Mhm.
myself right, and it starts to layer on,
Start to
and
build.
we may actually. Um, we have the mental filtering as well. So we
Mhm.
start to focus on, and our mind is wired also to look for the negative. It's part of our protection. So we tend to focus more on the things that make us right and the things that might, become
Right.
an issue for us. So we start to layer that in, and then we're this squishy being, and our beliefs actually become our emotional identity. You talked about the identity piece, right? So I think of identity as two parts. There's the mental modeling. That's the I'm a teacher, I'm a coach, I'm an aerospace executive, I'm
I'm an engineer. Yeah. Hmm.
whatever,
Hmm.
and I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a brother, I'm a sister. That's the mental model. The emotional identity is the I'm that kid and then that person that's never going to be good enough.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's really, really interesting that if you go back, there is this disconnect and it starts to show up. And so the 7 archetypes are things like the perfectionist. We'll see perfectionism coming out.
That's me.
Flawless. I see every issue, every little error, and I
Nothing's
actually
ever good enough.
never's good enough. Nothing's ever good enough. And I actually start to ruminate about that and I worry, and it goes down that trajectory, that downward spiral of what did they think? And are they going to like me? And is it going to be a problem in the future? And so, we can be critical of ourselves. We get critical of others. And I was blind to that. I was like, oh, I'm not critical of anyone else. And I'm not I know I'm kind of perfectionistic. I had a lot of good stories, and we tell ourselves those stories,
Right. You're like, well, I'm kind of like
right?
that, but not really.
And some of it comes from our culture, right? They're socially
Yeah.
conditioned perfectionists. So you come from a culture or a family dynamic, or you're in an industry like lawyers, right?
Mm.
Oh, imposter syndrome is pervasive, or someone in the technical field, right?
Mm.
So and so there's this sense of it has to be perfect. And in some cases, there is a higher level, you know, um, of perfection that we need in
Mhm.
some of those industries. I certainly wouldn't want a surgeon to,
Be kind of so. Yeah.
cut into
Oh,
me
80%
if
is good enough.
they didn't have a certain level of precision. But that being said, it's when it becomes maladaptive that is the issue. So I talked about perfectionism. That's probably starts to make sense. People pleasing is another big one. People
Mm.
pleasers have trouble setting boundaries, saying no, they put themselves last in their own life. And the story is I'm a nice person, I'm a good person.
How many
But
times have I heard that, right?
that's the behavior. But if you start to go through, and I have this whole thing called the mind stack, into the layers of the mind, thoughts and self-talk, right? That
Mhm.
chatterbox in our brain and our beliefs, we start to see this pattern below that of not good enough, right? People
Mhm.
are only going to like me or accept me. And there's probably some abandonment there.
Mhm.
And we may not even know it. My abandonment, I didn't even realize I'd felt abandoned. I didn't even understand it because I wasn't abandoned in a traditional way.
Right,
My
you weren't
parents
passed
were
off the
always there.
roadside
They
or
were
something.
wonderful parents, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
my abandonment issues really, they were emotional abandonment. My
Mhm.
mom was a people pleaser. She had trouble expressing love. So I had some emotional abandonment. She couldn't be there for me in that way. My father was, he overcompensated, but I didn't have the maternal. And my father would lose his temper if it was wonderful, by the way. My father was a gem. I wish everybody could have a father like this, but if he got upset, he would leave the house and take a drive to just work it off.
Mhm.
And every time I heard that door closed, I felt, where's daddy going? Why is daddy leaving? What did I do? And it had
Yeah, we
nothing.
internalize it. Yeah, we
We
make it
internalize,
about
and we
her.
all children, we think it's always all of us. It's our fault.
Mhm.
So there's the people pleaser. We put ourselves last in our own life. We have trouble setting boundaries. We end up resentful. It's not good. We
Also
end up
very
resentful, or we
mhm.
tend to feel like the victim,
We get
right?
feelings hurt really easily. Like I have a client who she wants to be seen. She doesn't use her voice. She puts herself last. She had an instance in her childhood where a sibling basically hated her,
Yeah.
you know.
Oh, right. And sometimes it's just that one thing, but it's heavy in us because
Mhm.
it's our own little personality and the way we internalized it
Right.
and the way we interpreted it at
Mhm.
that age and at that stage. I'm also a hypnotherapist. I don't know if I told you that, but I'm an integrative hypnotherapist and I do, clinical and cognitive behavioral neuroscience. And what happens, or cognitive behavioral therapy. And so what happens is in hypnotherapy, I end up doing a lot of inner child healing.
Mm.
This is a big piece of this. It's that reprogramming, right? Resetting that inside, those internalized beliefs.
Mhm.
And the other part of this, because I take a very holistic approach to getting past imposter syndrome, it's inside out. That's the inside
Right.
out part,
Mhm.
going deep, and the outside in repatterning. So it's reprogramming and repatterning because we will pattern, you know, thoughts, beliefs, self talk, not just actions, not just behaviors. And we don't realize these are patterns. So we need to create new neural pathways and set those in,
Yeah,
right? And let the
absolutely.
old ones sort of become extinct. So
And it takes time. It just takes intentional effort and energy.
it
And
does.
for anyone tuning either now or later, know that no matter what you're experiencing, for the most part, unless it's a physical loss of a limb or something like that, it can be repatterned. I mean, I've done tremendous deep work, and I've done that with my clients as well. And Cheryl, you have as well. People come in and they're like, "Well, they just don't believe that I can get past this," but you can. Yeah.
Yeah. And, the word belief is such an important word because,
Mhm.
our beliefs are not the reality, but they are our reality.
Right.
Our beliefs are our reality. So imagine if you can shift those beliefs, if you can clear old, limiting, unhelpful beliefs,
Hmm.
right? Imagine if you could replace those beliefs or just shift them a little bit and clarify them, change the perspective,
Right.
give yourself kind of that paradigm shift. So belief shifting or belief clearing is a big piece of this. And then that's really a growth mindset. So what I
Mhm.
always tell people is if the idea that imposter syndrome is something you can get past or you can't is a belief itself.
Yes.
If you can just open yourself to the possibility, even if it's a sliver, just a sliver of possibility, possibility leads to probability, and probability leads to inevitability, right?
Mhm.
You start
Mhm.
to take yourself down a different path. And beliefs can be shifted because it's not really the beliefs that are foundational, it's the experiences before those beliefs. So we
Mm-hmm.
go below beliefs to the actual experiences that happen and our interpretation at that age and at that stage. So imagine that a 3-year-old has an experience like, I'm afraid of the dark. I'll give you a real light one. There's monsters in the closet. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when I wake up, what if mommy isn't there? Maybe a child is dead. They lost their daddy. Something happened young. Now the fear that mommy's right. Will an 8-year-old have the same interpretation as a 3-year-old? Will a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 45-year-old have that same interpretation of that experience? So the age and the stage and the little personality are all part of this. So
Right.
we can go below that, we can revisit that child at that age and at that stage and help them give words to those feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Speaking
right.
of, you have a
To them.
framework in your book too. I think
Yeah.
you talk about, identifying is first, understanding, okay, what is imposter syndrome, and then understanding, okay, what is it from the archetypes. Like for me, perfectionism is one of those. For others, people pleasing might be another, archetype that
Yeah.
comes up. Those are two very common ones, particularly with all the high achievers I work with. Perfectionism is there, and then people pleasing shows up too. And sometimes they are together. It's not just one or the other.
Oh, I had all seven. And so many of the people I speak with and my clients definitely experience more than one. It's somewhere
Right.
usually between 3 to 4 to all seven. But yeah, so the book itself is written, as you said, it's a journey. The book itself is a journey. And
Mm.
it goes through 4 parts, 4 stages or phases. You start with awareness. We don't
Mhm.
know what we don't know, even when we think we do. And
Mhm.
what you don't know can hurt you.
Can.
So we get that awareness, the light bulb. That's where you start to demystify imposter syndrome. You look at the archetypes. And by the way, there are more than 20 exercises throughout the book. So it's a book
Oh,
you've got to use
fun.
as you
Yeah.
go through it. Then we go into insight. Okay, maybe I'm not all of those archetypes. They don't apply to me, but which ones do? And we really go into the insight phase. How is this showing up for me? And
Mm.
then it's the alignment because now you can see where the disconnects are and where things are out of alignment. So phase 3 is really about getting back into alignment.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
then phase 4 is that integration.
Mhm.
So it's a very thoughtful journey, if that makes sense. And you can see where it builds because you can't really start with integration. What are you integrating or even aligning? You need that awareness and the insight.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, self-awareness is the first step towards any growth at all. I've been preaching that for years for anybody
Yeah.
that's still long enough to hear it. I mean, because we can't grow something we don't know. If we don't understand it, you can't solve towards anything or create a process at all. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and so there are, as I said, there are 7 archetypes. There are a lot of archetypes to really go through. There's the master who feels like they need just one more degree or certification to be
Oh
quote
gosh.
unquote good enough. The lone
Yes, I've
ranger
seen
who
that too,
feels like
right?
they have,
I think
yeah,
I'll go get another certification, or maybe I'll go do my MBA. And I'm talking a lot of people out of ledges on that one. Certifications are fantastic if you feel like it will help you evolve specifically based on your target, but no, that's not, you know,
Mhm.
a requirement for you to show
Yeah.
up in a space. Yeah.
Yeah, the master is a big one for probably for your audience, a lot of high achievers, right?
Mhm.
And even with all of those accolades and the degrees and the certifications and the experience, we can walk into a room and immediately feel so small and like who we're not good enough. And comparison is such a big
Mhm.
part of that, and overthinking and people pleasing, and yeah, so it's quite amazing. I know we have some questions there, so you let me know if you want me to stop at all. But yeah, there's the Lone Ranger. That's another one. Feels like they need to go it alone, and behind
Oh
the Lone
yeah, have all the answers.
and have trouble delegating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Difficulty with collaboration. A lot of that stems from, you know, if I ask for help, someone might see that I'm not good enough to do it all alone,
Right, right. I have to
right?
prove that I'm good enough. Or, in my case, saw a lot of validation that being wildly independent was a good idea because we can't be dependent on others because we can't trust them. They might betray you. Blah 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 blah. Right.
Right. And where's that trust really?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that lack of trust in ourselves. So
Mhm.
yeah, so there are the superhero. I have to mention the superhero
Mhm.
because how many of the I'm going to say one of them, high achievers, feel like they have to be the superhero or the savior. So,
Mm.
again, there are seven. So really, one of the one of the things that I get asked a lot is, okay, so how do you get past it then? How do you really get past it? This
Right.
doesn't make sense. Isn't this something that is so pervasive that everyone has it?
Mhm.
And it, yeah, and it's interesting because it is pervasive. It's before the pandemic, it was, something like 70% globally of people experience, it's not half, but experience
Mhm.
imposter syndrome. Um, since the pandemic, it's more like 85% based on
Right.
studies I've seen, some really good studies. And who knows, it might be more because not everybody's, people don't
Right.
like
There's some shame. There's some shame around, not
dramatic.
thinking
Yeah.
we're perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
It's the suppression of emotions, right? We've put on this
Mhm.
cloak of confidence for so long and shown up the way we think other people want us to show up
Mhm.
that we are so afraid, so fearful of being found out as a fraud or a phony. By the way, I never identified with the word imposter or
Mhm.
fraud or phony,
No.
but the experiences were there and
Right.
the disconnect was there. So I personally wouldn't have named it imposter syndrome, but it makes sense, because we are
Mhm.
showing up and we feel like someone's going to find us out, figure out we're not as good as they thought we were.
Right.
Um, so one of the things that I coined in the book, I really was thinking about, this idea of how do you get past imposter syndrome?
Mhm.
And it's this idea that these behaviors are maladaptive. When we are overdoing, overthinking, overpleasing, we end up in overwhelm, right?
Mhm.
It's overdone and it's maladaptive. We are not adapting as the amazing human beings we're designed to be. I mean, if you look at us, it's genius,
Mhm.
it's genius. Look at our brains, our bodies, the way we go to it's amazing what we're capable of.
Yeah,
And
and for anybody tuning in, either now or later, we've gone through a couple of really, really interesting, behaviors that these are showing up. So I'd love to hear from anyone if you feel comfortable sharing. Yeah, this kind of sounds like what I'm experiencing, and what you're experiencing in your life. And you're right, Cheryl. It's about a balance. It's not that, as we were talking before the show, it's not that having a little bit of a doubt makes you this wildly broken person. That's not how it works. It's when it
yeah,
becomes a systemic problem and that doubt turns into worry, rumination, anxiety. That's when it becomes an issue.
yes, exactly, Erin. So, one of the things that I try to help people with and share is that there's something called the healthy zone. I want you to think of we're dynamic beings. We're not static. It's not like we have to be this way and it never moves. Things happen in our lives, we lose a job, we get a promotion, we move somewhere, we lose a relationship or maybe a person. Things happen and they're going to affect us. We are human beings having a human experience. It's really, really important that we give ourselves the grace and space for that. So there's an adaptive zone,
Mhm.
right? And I want you to think of a pendulum swinging over that zone. So as things happen, we adapt. We're not going to stay in center. We might rock back and forth in center, and then something happens and we swing out a little bit.
Mhm.
Outside of this healthy zone are these maladaptive behaviors. That's when it's swinging too far. The pendulum swings, right?
Mhm.
Too far. And that's when it creates havoc. in our mind, our emotions, and of course, we now know in our bodies,
Right.
right?
Right.
As
Mhm.
I'm trying to think of the author that wrote The Body Keeps the Score, fabulous book. Um, Such an important idea and understanding that this will show up. It
Mhm.
shows up in our behaviors as well. So there's this whole idea of inner child and outer child. This idea that now all of a sudden, we're showing up almost in childlike behaviors or self-sabotaging behaviors
Mhm.
in our lives because there's a wounded inner child. And this is all maladaptive.
And we're justifying these behaviors too, by the
Well,
way.
and we create stories to
Yep.
cope and to
Mhm.
adapt. That becomes our adapt. And we also start to normalize this
Mhm.
behavior. That's the issue. And I've heard so many people say, just normalize imposter syndrome. Everyone has it. And I say the opposite. Please don't normalize this behavior.
Mhm.
You're creating a new set point when you normalize this behavior. You're saying it's okay to feel this way.
It's saying it's okay to be
You'll
miserable.
settle into this life
No.
that you don't deserve, frankly.
Mhm.
So I say don't normalize it. Don't allow that set point. That there is this healthy zone and you can get back to this healthy zone. And I've watched and seen clients as I brought them back into the healthy zone say things like, I didn't even know I could feel this way. I didn't know I could feel so at peace. When this happened before, I would have thought about it for months or weeks or days or whatever it was. I would have been worried about it, because our mind wants to fill in the blanks. You know,
Mhm.
when
Or
call
worry on it. Yeah.
worry, worry, worry about, which is in the future. It's not now. And usually it's not real, right? Most of the
Mhm.
time, maybe 99% of the time, virtually what we're worrying about doesn't come to reality.
Right.
So it's in the future, and the woulda, coulda, shouldas are in the past. So
Mhm.
we need to be back into the present. So we get back into this healthy zone. By the way, stress is a big one. Stress is such a this what I call prolonged unmanaged stress. Another word for that is burnout. Is at epidemic proportions right now, right?
Mhm.
Right? But there's actually a healthy zone for stress.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely. Our bodies and brains have
Stress.
been designed to handle short-term stress. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not that we can expect to go through our lives without any stress. Of course, we can do that. And you're
But stress,
right. Also, when it becomes protracted.
yeah. So let me talk about a few things in the healthy zone. So doubt's a big one, right?
Mhm.
People say, "Oh, I'm doubting myself." Well, in the healthy zone, doubt is your discernment muscle. We want to have a certain amount of healthy doubt. Am I good enough? In the healthy zone isn't such a bad thing. Am I ready for this? Am I ready to step into this role? Maybe I'm actually not in the healthy zone, right? In
Right.
maladaptive, I'm very ready and I still think I'm not,
Mm.
right? I
Or
still
we are
doubting myself.
technically ready, and we're making up stories about
We're
how
making up stories or
we're trying to find proof that we're not, or
right.
that sort of thing. But yeah, there's a difference between a healthy normative doubt matrix, which comes with change or something new, or making a shift or making a decision. It's normal to feel a certain amount of thoughts one way or the other, whether it's doubt or concern or even considering something. It's when we start to provide evidence contrary to actual facts, that's when things are an issue.
Exactly. And then fear, people that say just be fearless, lose the fear, no fear. But fear is our great protector.
Oh.
We need fear. Fear needs to become our friend.
Mhm.
Fear, like stress, gives us that hit of adrenaline. It protects us. Um, in the healthy zone, it's a good thing. We need to see if something really is a threat. And if
Mhm.
it isn't, we can turn it into our friend because we get that adrenaline rush and we can step out onto stage to make that talk. We can give that presentation. We can step out in front of the video, right, and go live or do that, start that podcast or whatever it is. So, fear in the healthy zone is our great protector and motivator. right? And we all know what happens in the maladaptive zone. Stress. Oh, let me talk about comparison. This is a big one
Oh
for,
yeah. Yeah.
right. So everybody says, stop comparing yourself to everyone else. And I don't say that. I don't say stop comparing yourself. I say compare yourself in a healthy way.
Mm,
Comparison is, how do we know who we are if we don't know who we are not? How do we know day without night, right?
mhm.
Black without white, all of these things. It's very, very important. So it's really important that we understand. By the way, it looks like my battery is a little bit low, so I hope I don't lose you.
Sure, sure. Can you
Just
plug in
want
really
you to
quick?
know. I will plug in.
Yeah.
We're in the show, so I don't want to run and grab that. But, um, uh,
Yeah,
you
we
know,
can go ahead and maybe say a few things about the book. And I think you have a program too, or a journey, I think is what you called it. Because we talked about the archives, which were fantastic, by the way. Thank you for sharing that, Cheryl. It was really, really illuminative. And then also understanding like what are some of the what's happening, like what are you experiencing that might be able to link to some of these. And then we also chatted a little bit about, hey, okay, so what's in a healthy zone? Like what's normal? And then, this is what happens when it gets outside of that normal balanced area. And then I know you have a fantastic journey. We don't call it a course; we call it a journey, as you mentioned, because it's true. You're going on a journey. You're going somewhere. So we could certainly pop that in LinkedIn. We'll pop that in the comments on YouTube. I think that's already on the YouTube comments as well. So share a little bit about what that journey is before we wrap up the show today.
yeah, so the journey is called the Voyage Past Self-Sabotage. It's a 90-day journey. It's really like a mastermind, but it's meant to get you to the other side of self-sabotage. And by
Mhm.
the way, there's a lot in this journey that also gets you past imposter syndrome. So
Mhm.
that you know, and it's been very effective. What I found is 100% of the people that have gone through it have really seen pretty big shifts in their lives. So it's been quite amazing in that respect. It's been really quite good. Um, and then I also have, of course, the book is available on Amazon worldwide and
Mhm.
in many other outlets, Barnes and Noble, and what have you, here in the U.S. So that's The Imposter Lies Within.
Mhm.
Yes, and then
Absolutely, and I highly recommend that you go get that book. And so, Cheryl, before we wrap up, if you've got enough battery life there, if not, I'll be happy to. If you want to go backstage and grab that book, I can happily hold the show and continue to chat with our folks. Would you like to do that?
to get the cord, I can do that. Yeah, if you have
Yeah,
just a moment.
if you don't mind, Cheryl's going to step backstage really quick, and then I'm going to go ahead and hold the show spot for her while she does that. So we've talked a little bit about, for those of you who are tuning in either live now or watching the replay later, we talked a lot around what imposter syndrome really is today, and I think it's very, very illuminating to understand that it's not just something that, oh well, I'm doing something, I don't feel like I'm really cut out for it, or maybe I feel like I'm putting on a show. It's actually much more pervasive than that. And I know a couple of things that she said actually pinged me. I was like, wait a minute, this is me too. So imposter syndrome, while Cheryl doesn't necessarily agree with the terminology, but it does fit the bill, if you will. Now, her book, The Imposter Lies Within, outlines a fantastic framework helping understand and identify, like, what are some of the experiences you might be having? What are some of the archetypes, if you will, of imposter syndrome? And then what's the journey we can go through to identify the root cause? And as we've chatted a little bit today, a lot of this lies in our early experiences. As we evolve as a human being, these experiences will start to create behavior patterns based on our mindset around that experience. Now, what's interesting is people think to themselves, well, logically, this doesn't make sense. Well, my friends, we're not logical beings. I would love to say that our cognitive brain drives us 100% of the time, but as we all know, that's not the case. So, a lot of times these mindsets are set up in our limbic zone, or our more animal part of our brain, which is driven by emotion. So, how do you feel in that instance actually can create a mindset that then helps you exhibit certain behaviors in the future. So now that Cheryl's back, what I'd love to do is chat a little bit about what can people do? Because I know for those of you tuning in now or later, you're probably thinking to yourself, great, I know I have this thing. What can I do? I know I can buy your book. I know I can go on this journey. But what else can I do today? What's just a little thing, maybe becoming more self-aware, or is there something I can do to start myself on the right path to removing the impacts of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking as I was plugging my computer in, I was thinking in another life, before I had brought myself past imposter syndrome, I would have ruminated about something like that and worried about it and thought,
Mm.
beating myself
How
up.
can I have done that right?
And instead, I just kind of laughed and said, "Oh, rookie move. What are you doing here?"
That's fine.
and,
Yeah,
and
of
I
course.
won't think about it again. So, first of all, for anyone that is listening, and if you're still here, if you've been here from the beginning, especially, um, I just want to say you've already taken the first step. You're
Mm.
listening in. You're beginning that awareness journey right now. What you can do right now today is, the very first thing I want to say is if you are thinking about this and you're worrying about this, the very first thing I'd like you to do is just get that habit of putting your physical state into your parasympathetic nervous system. And what I
Mm.
mean by that is when we are in the limbic part of our brain, the amygdala, we are in what's called the fight or flight part of our brain. And we end up being that in that area of our brain, kind of in a prolonged, unnatural way, maladaptive way. So we've gotten used to it. And when we are doing that, that takes resources away from other parts of our body and our brain. So our logical brain, our digestive system. Um, we want to bring you back into the rest and digest so your whole brain, your whole body can be part of this experience, because you will make better decisions and you will be able to bring yourself in any situation along in a better way. So just do the easiest way to do that is some very simple breathing techniques. Just doing really deep breathing past the lungs. You don't want to just go into that shallow breathing that hits the
Mm.
top of the lungs. That actually
Really
will
deep
get
down in the
more.
diaphragm,
Yeah,
feeling the
more.
diaphragm expand. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. So that, by the way, that shallow breathing actually creates more anxiety. So you want to breathe nice and deep, almost like you're trying to pull that breath into the base of your spine. Low and slow is what I say. Breathe in, hold it, and let it go. You can do this as box breathing, triangle breathing. You can call it what you want. Low and slow for 3 to 5 cycles, and you will actually pop yourself into your parasympathetic nervous system. And do that when it's not critical, because you want, when something comes up, you want your body to already recognize that pattern. So it's easier for you to actually go into it and get yourself out of that
Right.
anxiety
Yeah.
moment.
If you're trying to do that in a critical situation, then you may actually not be as helpful in the long run.
Yeah, so if you've already kind of conditioned your brain, in this pattern, it's like a pattern, it's easier to go to that. The second thing is, I like to call this a badass list. People call it different things, but write out your list, your actual list, and handwrite if you can. Use your pen to paper, not on your computer. Handwrite all of your accomplishments and add the soft skills. Are you a really good listener? Are you patient? What are the things? I'm a great team builder. Whatever those skill sets are, not just the degrees, you know, the presentations you've given, the things that you've done that have really moved the needle. Write those down. Write those down so you can actually see it, because there is a disconnect from that. And when you start to see it, it's really powerful. And a couple of things I would do with that list. One is I would then type it up on your phone in your notes so it's always there, because our phone is the one thing we carry around with us. And so if you ever start to doubt yourself or feel like you're not good enough, go back and look at that and remind yourself in that moment. The
Mm-hmm.
second thing is I would take that list, the handwritten list, I would stand in front of a mirror, and I'd do this for about 2 weeks every day. And you can even do it morning and night and read your list to you. Look at yourself as you're reading it to you. This mirror work is really powerful. It's almost like you're hearing someone else say it to you and hearing it back.
It's an I am list.
It's
Yeah.
an I am list.
Mhm.
And then the third thing, and these are two things you can do right now. Today, as soon as you stop listening to this podcast, you can do this. The third thing I would do is I would ask 3 people that you like. You know, we ask for feedback from people that we admire, we like, we really want their feedback, and we know they have our back, right? Okay. So you choose those people wisely. Ask for feedback from 3 people. And when I say feedback, just ask them a very simple question. Tell me about me. If you're talking to someone else, Erin, about Sheryl and Jeanette, what would you say? Like, tell me about me.
Mhm.
I'm just curious. And if you can record that and listen to it, it will be eye-opening
Mhm.
in such a beautiful way. You'll be very surprised at what people have and internalize it as much as you can. You know, somebody said to me many years ago, I wish you could see yourself the way I see you. And I mean, I was dazed by that. I still remember the moment, the place, her saying it. I remember weeks later going, what does she mean? What does she see in me? So it's powerful.
Yeah. It is very powerful. It's an exercise that I do with a lot of my clients. We're talking about self-discovery and understanding our zone of genius and what our gifts and our inner brilliance are. It's that understanding of how we're showing up. Because sometimes, our gifts, our talents fly underneath the radar because they come natural to us. Who
Mhm.
we are, we're so familiar with who we are, we don't really see ourselves. It's almost like going on a diet, losing weight. You see yourself in the mirror every day. Maybe it doesn't show up to you, but if you haven't seen someone and about a month and they look at you and go, wow, you've lost so much weight, or wow, this has changed, and you don't really see it because you're living it every day. You're in
Yeah, and it doesn't even, it's so interesting. It doesn't even have to be physical, like
Mhm.
losing weight, right? I remember when I was going through a divorce and I had finally moved into my own place.
Mhm.
I hadn't told a soul at work other than the owner of the company, because I felt my manager and the owner of the company, because I felt they needed to know. I hadn't said a word to anyone. And people would say, what's changed with Sheryl? She
Right.
seems so different.
Yep.
And because I was so much freer, that
Mhm.
heaviness was kind of not completely gone. That took a little bit longer, but it had lifted so much for me. So people can see that because emotions are heavy. Well, emotions actually, I wouldn't say emotions are heavy. Each emotion has a vibration, which I know you work with this,
Mhm.
Erin. This idea that emotions actually have a vibration and, there are heavy emotions and lighter
It
emotions.
can be, yeah, sure. Absolutely. Well, Cheryl, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show today. And I think it's been a fantastic journey talking to you and learning more about what imposter syndrome is, what it is not. And also, what are some of the archetypes? How does this show up in our lives? And most importantly, how can we start to identify that and get that root cause out there so we'll understand how to heal from that inside out? And just some, very practical tactics we can implement right now, be more present, become more aware, so we can evolve as people in the now. So it's been such a pleasure, Cheryl, having you on the show. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up today?
And by the way, thank you, Erin. I mean, amazing. The only thing I'd really like to share with your audience is this: you are good enough. You are worthy. You are deserving. Your voice matters and you matter.
Oh, that's such a great way to wrap up the show. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of you tuning either live or watching the replay or listening to the podcast. And as always, my friends, keep elevating. Until next time, bye for now.